In the continuing battle between Mike Tyson and automobiles, no, goods and services, nouns and verbs, and some of the stuff that we've been talking about, let us onward press. At the ordinary level at which we are now living, in what we have been calling the secondary and the primary world, the secondary world is created specifically in one way, and that is by turning processes into things. If you did not do that, there would not be anything that we'd be referring to as the secondary world. Now, while the primary world can be very succinctly put, very directly put by almost anyone on this planet, for pointing out simply the drive for the human race to stay alive, or sex, security, and sustenance. The primary world, you can see in this juxtaposition quite clearly, would be one of processes. Eating, resting, sleeping, copulating. Processes. But then when it becomes a secondary world, the processes become thing specific, and eating becomes specific meals, specific food. Rest, sleep becomes specific individual places of abode, your house, your condo. And then sex, rather than being a process, not that it stops being a process, but in addition to, adjacent to, and non-specific, non-sequential directions, then sex can become such things in the modern world as love, lover, put all these slash, I guess, love slash, lover slash, fetish slash. In other words, everything, without there being any sort of judgment made about this, but everything that would be beyond mere mute rutting, just a mere act of sex. Anything besides that would be a form of secondary world sex. And as such, it has taken the process and thingamatized it. It has had to thing specific it. That is the difference between, not that one is right or wrong anymore, because you're simply dealing with a kind of neo form of necessity now, like in the neo primary is now what we're calling the secondary world. But rather than just talk about eating, rather than it being non-specific, rather than it being a process, which eating is, rather than it being a process, when it gets into the secondary world, it's something in addition to that. And it becomes thing specific, that the process has become a thing in addition to the process, because you've still got to eat to dine, if we use that distinction verbally. That if dining is the secondary act, you've still got to do the primary act to engage in dining. That is, you've still got to eat. Or if you're engaged in some sort of love relationship, like the good old joke that if you're a masochist and you have found true love because you have found a sadist to whip you and make you like it, then you've still got to, we'll assume, that it's not just that you're going to end up engaged in sex. So the secondary does not simply replace it. If it does, even in the secondary world, that sort of thing becomes referred to by such colloquial terms as perversions, which would be a perversion if someone tried to substitute real eating for dining. It would become a perversion. It would become suicidal, if not to the individual, to the benefit of humanity. So the secondary aspects of the primary affairs are not intended in the general scheme of things. No offense to you perverts. Don't write me. Don't have your union try to picket me. I could use a fence, though, a small picket fence. But in the general scheme of things, the secondary is not intended to replace the primary. And at times when it seems to, what I was going to say, it is normally referred to nowadays as perversions, and other times it's referred to as demonic But the point is, it is a form of non-profitable activity. It is a form, either fast or slow, of suicidal activities if the secondary. If you got more involved with the dining experience as to where you ate, making sure that people saw that you ate there, that you were right up to the latest fad, that you carried around in whatever city you lived in, dining in Peoria today, and they put it out daily, and you had to have the day's copy. You could end up running around and never eat, that you became so involved with doing that which would be the secondary fad, that you could harm yourself physically, that is, not get enough to eat or not get enough of a balanced diet to eat. And so it becomes suicidal. If not to you individually, if it became widespread to the point, it would be suicidal. So it is not that the secondary is intended to replace the primary. It is operating in adjacent to it. But the specific that I want you to see is, for the secondary world to exist, which it does exist, I may have named it, but it does exist, and I assume by now, after us using a few weeks up, talking around the edges of it and pointing at it, that you can see that it does go on, that there is a specific, useful way to take that kind of map, to see that there are activities that go on that, relatively speaking, in the area of graduations, there are things that people do that seem to be almost necessary today, at least to keep you from terminal ennui, at least to keep you busy, since you're not out having to gather fruits and nuts every day, not counting your uncle who keeps wandering off, but you're not having to wander out every day and actually fight your way for food and to find a cave or to dig out a ditch deep enough for you to hide from a hurricane or your uncle. And so there are other things going on that from one view you could say are not absolutely mandatory to stay alive, that it's not absolutely necessary for a person to have a car to stay alive. But it's almost necessary to have an automobile nowadays to be really alive. It's certainly not necessary for you to dress in the latest styles to keep the rain, the cold weather off of you, but to be part of the secondary world, be part of the civilized world, it is almost necessary to be up to date, to live to the fullest. If you're going to wander around and be out of it, if you're going to walk around and look like the poster boy for Dorks Anonymous, you can't expect a lot in life. You're not really going places. You're not probably going to be adopted by Lee Iacocca driving by and suddenly stops a limo and says, "There's my kind of guy." You're probably not going to be hunted down and force-fed a scholarship to Harvard. But the secondary world, back to where we were, it do exist, and it do exist in a specific manner. It exists by taking that which at the primary level are processes and making them things, making them thing specific, because sex is sex. But then when it gets in the secondary world, let's call it love. Love, people are not just in love. People, if you ask somebody, they may say, "Boy, I'm in love." Yeah, you do look kind of funny. Well, I'm in love. And then your next question is, with who? And those of you using out-of-date books may say, with whom? But if you're going to talk like that, you don't deserve to be in love anyway. But you say with whom because you know somebody is in love with somebody. But if it's just a couple of guys sitting around, and maybe women do it nowadays, but if a couple of guys sitting around, one says, "Jesus, I'm horny." Another guy, at least if he's a real guy, the other guy doesn't say, "Horny for who?" If there's a couple of guys talking, you say you're horny, you mean you're horny. Let's go somewhere that there might be women. And another guy doesn't say, "Well, exactly what kind of women?" Unless it was perhaps South Carolina, and the first guy might have to specify one that's alive. But don't write me from South Carolina, you bunch of perverts. But if it's in the secondary, once it gets into the secondary, it becomes thing specific. It does it with sex. It does it, like we were just talking about, with food. If somebody says, "I'm hungry, let's eat." But if it's in the secondary world, somebody will then say, "Well, where do you want to go?" And if the guy was really, the first person was really seriously operating under the auspices of the primary drives, he might say, "I don't care, I'm hungry." Of course, that's not very civilized. But the thing is, once it is in the secondary world, and you're not just out to eat, you call up a friend or you see someone on the street and you say, hey, how's it going? I hadn't seen you in a while. What are you doing? You don't go, I was about ready to eat. I'm sort of hungry. You don't go somewhere to eat. It is now partly, you understand, a social occasion. Perhaps sometime in the next few hours you were going to eat, but now you've met the person, you chitted for a while, and then perhaps you even considered chatting, and you thought, well, let's go. We're going to eat anyway, so let's go eat. And then it becomes thing specific. Where shall we go? Shall we go to a Denny's? Shall we go to a nice restaurant? What are you in the mood for? Italian. It does become thing specific. It is no longer a process once it gets into the secondary world. As always, examples, may we say, abound. Let me give you a handful. One is there seems to be another wave of fundamentalist, God wants you to be rich. Seems like every time I turn on the TV now and see those ministers, at any rate, what I was going to get was an example just recently. There's a minister and he's there praying out for the congregation, and what he's praying for, I hope some of you don't laugh and think I'm making this up, and he's praying for the people, his people, to be released from the, and I'm going to quote, because I can remember this much, the demon of debt. And then he went on, I couldn't resist, so I listened for a while, and he began to quote scriptures, I assume. He said he was, which is good enough for me, but he was saying, at least looking right in the camera at these people, that God, or at least the God of the southern United States, does not want his people to be in debt, and what a shame it is. And then the camera would pan out there, and these people going, yes, oh. Remember, he's not talking about drugs. I guess that was last week. He's not talking about alcohol or being in the grip of some sexual perversion that you want to dress up when you're about to do it and try and look like an Episcopalian or something really weird. It's the demon of debt. And he's pounding and screaming that God does not want real good Christians to be in debt. The demon of debt. Now, note that somewhere along the way, we'll assume that they all didn't get conned, that somewhere along the way they entered into some kind of equitable transaction, that they whipped out their MasterCard and saw some clothes at Kmart that they could not resist, the latest fashion, and so they spent it. But now the minister is saying, most of you are in debt, you can't pay your bills, and it makes life miserable, and the camera sweeps out, and just almost every mother's son and daughter out there going, yes, Lord, oh my goodness. And so then he begins to rail out against the demon of debt. A thing, not a process, not that, well, you people, is everybody in debt here and behind? And they all go, well, yes. And he said, you think God, does that make you miserable and kind of takes the edge off life? And they go, sure it does. He said, well, do you think God wants us to be like this? And they all go, no. Of course, they're saying, I hope not. What there is saying is, come on, if you got more to tell me, like how to get out. And so rather than him passing out free money, though, he says he's going to pray for them and pray that God will release them from the demon of debt. Not the process of being in debt, which, just taking ordinary descriptions, they freely entered into. They applied for a credit card somewhere, or credit, and somebody gave it to them, and then they took it to the limit, and then probably then some. One step over the line, sweet Jesus. It didn't even take a toke. They just went over it. They couldn't resist. The glamour and the glitz of a Walmart or a Kmart just got the best of them, and so now. But notice it is treated. Now, we're not picking on the religion, of course, because this was serious business. This was a big-time show. It made TV. The minister could afford to go on TV, and there was more people in his audience than are sitting here watching us do this tonight. And they're sitting there, and yes, and it was serious. But notice, it is treated as though it was not a process. And it's not really about debt. I'm just pulling out examples that are everywhere again. It's not about religion, and it's not about foolishness. But notice it took a process with which everyone is familiar, I'll assume by now. Everyone is familiar of how to go in debt. And unless you are really, really operating at some other level, there was not some little demon that looked like Walt Disney drew and that sing on your shoulder saying, yeah, go ahead, take that credit card. Go ahead and take it. Take it. It was after your soul to put you in debt so that you'd be miserable and then end up in Hades. It was a process. Buying on credit. But now notice, it is to a very specific point that they are now accepting the directions that we are praying for release from a thing, not a process, from the demon of debt. And of course, he could have even skipped the demon of debt, but I guess they like that stuff. He could just said, to release me from the grip of debt. Now you could, I know. Debt could be a verb. But you understand that is not the way that they would be being used. And it's not the way that they would be reacting to the energy. Release us from debt, as though debt were a thing. And debt is also a noun. But notice it was a process originally. But it is now not treated as a process in this example. Treated as a thing. It's as though this demon, as though debt itself, and somehow tricked these people. A thing, not a process, because the human intellect is not yet wired, as I'm not saying it ever will be, but it's wired to treat processes as foes. And for very good reason, because processes are the fair description of the primary drives. But people do not, the human intellect does not conceive of, could not even be convinced of, it wouldn't make any sense to take processes and try and treat them as being demonic, as being adverse. It just, I'm not even going to stop there. It just would not work. It has to be thingamatized. It has to be made thing specific. I hear, well, everybody does, other efforts outside religion, very common in the city, that sales pitches, seminars, but especially in the, let's leave, how about the commercial world, which I guess ordinary people would think is pretty far removed from the hallowed halls of the churches. The world of business, you're hearing people constantly urged to avail themselves of something out in the marketplace so as to save time and effort. A vacuum cleaner, new tires, who knows what. But it is a constant enjoiner. Do so and so, buy this, take advantage of this, and save time and effort. Of course, I will admit, churches use that, but they got a different description, and they don't understand it. But save time and effort. Which is all right, unless you begin to see what we're sketching out tonight. And there is no time any more than there is a demon of debt. This demon of debt, of making a process into a thing specific, that is what ordinary time becomes through the process of effort. It is not a matter of save time and effort. The ordinary feeling of time is not a verb. It is not a process. Not in the way in which I just used it, not in the way in which the ordinary intellect normally takes it. Time is taken to be a thing. All right, think about it a damn second. Now, you might have some childish part of your intellect, so that's not true. It is true. I don't have time to fool with it. You shouldn't have time to fool with it. At least take my example then, if you can't get any further than that for the second. Save time and effort would seem to be two different things. Why else would somebody spend big bucks with an advertising agency and then to come up with this brilliant slogan of buy our product and save time and effort? Buy this new lawnmower that will cut faster and rolls easier. It's self-propelled. So save time and effort. And nobody questions that's two different things. And if somebody was dumb enough to jump up and say, well, it's not, who the hell cares? Right? Except the very thing that we're talking about. There is no such thing, really, as time, the thing. Time becomes the thing specific that is the product of effort. But it is treated as two different things, such as going in debt and debt are treated by this minister, my erstwhile example, as two different things. In fact, the latter, that is the process, is given very little notice, if any. It is turned into a thing specific that debt is the problem. That debt is a thing. or in the real fundamentalist pitch, the demon of debt, like they're evil spirits. One anti-angel somewhere, some demonic entity that is in charge of one thing, not tempting you to dress up funny and hang around and try to pick up sailors at the bus station, not tempting you to take drugs, tempting you to do something almost as bad, go in debt, be in debt to the point that it drives you nuts, and that they take away your mobile home, or in South Carolina, your house trailer, which is what God intended to be called anyway. Just one man's opinion. There is no such thing as debt, even if there is. There is no such thing as debt, the thing, without the process. The process produced, if somebody says, does debt have a hold on you? And people say, yes. It was a process, though, even if we're going to call debt finally a noun, a thing, the demon of debt. How did you get there? Well, and then they're going to describe. Now, if they were really of that kind of intellectual, wired persuasion to say, well, I've had demonic forces operating in my family for years, and some of my relatives were alcoholics, and I don't know, me and my mama, we ended up in debt a lot. It was like there's always been this thing telling me, don't live within your means. You've got to keep up with your neighbors. It was like greed and avarice. They're describing a process. And yet the minister, or whoever it was, could say, well, of course, now you're in a position, I guess it's no longer funny, or it's no longer just something that you might could talk about. Are you actually in the grip? Is it now running your life? Yes, it is. Yes, help me, minister. Help me, sir. That debt now has you. Yes. They're speaking now as though debt is a thing. But notice, to get there, without them even seeing the difference, it was a process. Now back to where we were. Time and effort. Save time and effort. Sounds as distinct as to say demons, the demon of debt, and then the process of applying for credit. Well, they got some kind of vague connection, but we're talking about two separate things. Time and effort would seem to be even more distant, and they're not. Time would plug in where the demon of debt was, and effort would be where applying for credit would be. Because there is no time unless people are expending effort. But now wait. People, beings, sans intellect, expend effort on this planet, hippos and everything else. So, we're not alone in expending primary effort, but who is alone on this planet that has time? And you guessed it. Because time becomes a secondary product. It becomes thing specific of all effort. And once the kinds of effort that were silent, once the efforts that were primarily, absolutely necessary to keep humanity individually and collectively going, once they become secondaryized, they have to become thing specific, and one of the things they referred to then is as time. Not a process, a thing. A thing that can be saved, a thing that can be wasted, a thing that can catch up with you, a thing that can kill you, a thing that will finally overthrow all governments, crumble all castles, rot all bodies. But it's not a thing. It in fact does not exist apart from the process that primarily produced the secondary version of it. And sometimes they seem to have some even verbal connection, such as the demon of debt and going in debt. It's almost the same. But then you say time and effort, and it can be seen in a certain way as being as apparently mutually exclusive as saying there are only two things possible in the world, and that's goods and services. Only two things can be transacted, or that you can divide up all the world's, all the mortal activities into goods and services, except for this. You can also see that goods do not really exist. They are the thing specific of services. Now you might first think, well, there are goods, but they're not. Not until services have made them thing specific. All right, gold. That'd get most people's attention, probably that we're in debt in the Assembly of God church somewhere, hearing a minister. But consider this. Gold is of no value until it's a thing. comma, and gold is not a thing until it's been serviced. That is, it's not a valuable goods until it's been serviced. It has got to be mined, shined, and named. And of course, it's got to be pointed out that it is of value. How plain can it be? Well, probably too plain. In other words, if you didn't know anything about gold, would it be of any value? What if you went out and you tripped and fell, and instead of falling into some deserted, abandoned septic tank, what if you fell into a gold mine? And you knew nothing about gold? Is it of any value? And I'm not trying to play, of course, any kind of philosophical game. The fact is, no. It is, in fact, though, even more subtle than that. Even if you knew that gold was of value and you fell down in a ravine and you looked around and you were fairly sure without being in engineering or saith you to yourself, aha, methinketh it's gold. So you might think it's gold, but you understand this. You cannot run into town without me having to drag this out into all kinds of potential, real minute scenarios. You can't simply go into town and say, I know where there's gold, may I have credit? Even Kmart's not going to go for that. Or if you come into town and you had a handful that you scraped out of there, and you had not only the minerals but the gangue too, that you have not mined it, you have not cleaned it up, you have not separated the worthwhile, the elements you want, the minerals you want, just from the rest of the dirt, the gangue itself. If you just walk in, you say, I found gold. And somebody says, Kmart, so I've heard that story before. And you say, no. And you reach in your pocket and you say, look at that. And they might look, and you say, see that little stuff? And they say, well, yeah, it looks like gold. And you say, well, can I get credit? You surely see. You don't have much. Gold, which would seem to be, I was just picking out another example that I would think would be a fair representation of goods, valuable goods, in the cities all over the world. And yet gold is not anything of value until it's a thing. If it's the process, don't let crudeness get you now. That you may be standing out there and you think, well, I can get the rights to this land. I can go buy this, nobody knows about it. And you see it down there. And you're convinced, let's say you do know enough about mining that you just glance at it and you're convinced there is a potential fortune here. Potential. What will it take to make it a fortune? Services. You got to get down there and hump it. Or you got to pay somebody to. Because you can say the gold's there and the gold is a thing. But a ball's not a ball until it's thrown. You can say, well, I made it, or a frisbee is not. We produced it and there it is. But until that thing is thrown, it is not a frisbee. It's got no value as a frisbee. You can say, well, it is a frisbee. I know when I see it. I know that's gold. There are no such things as goods except for the end result of services. It has to be based upon that which is very primary, and that is effort. That is activity. Not thinking of action, but actual action itself. Getting a bit more personal, if we may. An example that we have used, mentioned in the past, you can take a pig, and without much effort at all, same as a dog, but I was going to use something else. You can take a pig, and without any effort, just within several days, you can put down the pig chow, and just before you do, you can holler, food, food. Very shortly, just the average pig, you can walk out the back door and holler food, and he will run either right to you, if that's what he's used to, or right over where the food is. The pig is not reacting to the word food as a thing. He is not reacting to that bag of Purina pig food. If a pig could think, he does not hear the word, that sound, which is of course not a word to him, but he does not hear the sound food. And if he did think, if his nervous system had anything going on resembling thought, he does not picture a bag of pig chow, or if there's a nice can of Alpo chopped pig dinner. No. What he reacts to is the process of eating. And in the past we've used a dog, but I was going to try and get you to stretch your mind a little bit, because people are inclined to, understandably, sometimes read more into their relationship to domestic animals. And you can think that your dog is very intelligent, which I hope he is. I'm all in favor. But your dog, which just knows the word food, or you can get tricky and change him to actually saying cow can or KK. But he does not react to that can of dog food. He does not react to a thing. It is not possible. You have got to have the intellect working in the nervous system. You've got to have the nervous system, if it was a pig, and we're not going to call it an intellect. But you've got to have the nervous system to the point that it could talk, because it would have to be able to take processes, put names on them, and make them things specific. So no matter what you think, that dog, if he could do anything resembling thought, you can hold up the can and say, food, and he gives that same look, and he just smiles, and he looks at you like, God, what a guy you are. What a jewel, what a prince you are to do that. But if he was doing anything resembling thought, it is not about the food. It's not about a thing. It's about him eating. It is about a process. Because without the intellect talking, without there being a secondary world, there is no such thing as things. There would not be to humans. And of course, I'm having to stretch reality to the point that would almost want to snap back and hurt you, unless you were protected by a thick coat of insulating neural fat. There is a quite useful place for trying to consider this. Dash. After we've been through it enough, and I was going to try and get you to see some of it a little further, that an animal would not be the most intelligent, a chimpanzee, anything on this planet, anything in the 3D world that cannot talk, to take something as specific to them, as primary to them as it is to us, such as food. If they could do anything resembling thought, just take this as a kind of these revolutionary pictures, because it's not true, but if they were doing anything resembling thought, and they certainly seem to, that you holler food and the dog leaps in the air, runs around. You can even make him do tricks. You can teach him that when you say food, he's got to stand up and turn around twice. You can do anything you want to, but he is still not reacting to the sound food as a thing. Even when you put it there, he does not, if he saw anything resembling thought, he does not look at the food as a thing. What he's engaged in is the process. What he's reacting to is the process of eating, not the thing. Now, would anyone care to apply that to man and the word I, rather than dogs and the word food? It doesn't cost any more. I just ask you if you'd care to. All right, if it helps, I can tell you this. There is no such word as I in the primary world. In no primary world, in any of the primary kingdoms of any strata, any area, there is no such word as I. I do believe we'll press on, but I'll ask one more time, would anybody care to consider the picture of dogs and their reaction to the word food, and the fact that they are not reacting to food as a thing, no matter what you believe. They are reacting to that sound as representing to them that they are used to reacting to as a process, the process of eating. Not the thing food, the process of eating. Would you care to try and apply that instead of dogs and the word food, into man and the word I? Well, if I leave it to you, at least you've got to understand you got the choice of not considering it. How about let's go into expansion 201, or maybe it's 202, and consider something else we've been talking about, institutions. A larger view of it, even society itself. What life makes men call society, and such things as society made this person act this way. Society has caused large numbers of people to behave in a certain way, or certain institutions offer certain help, offer certain directions, represent certain threats. Institutions, society itself, are processes turned into things. Just what we've been already talking about. You have got primary activities via words brought into the secondary territory, but it seems to be on a larger scale. If you get a glimpse of this, is how we can operationally say such things as we oftentimes say, that there is no such thing as any institution apart from the people in it. Which that last part is really parenthetical and not necessary once you begin to see the real point that at the 3D level of somebody, that is your own intellect, saying, well, there is such a thing as the church. There is such a thing as the state. No, there's just not. And if you've got to for the time being, there's no such thing as the church, as any institution, comma, apart from those that apparently make it up. Can you see how it is operationally feasible and useful to make such statements, to realize that the church, whatever it is, the state, the military, academia, that if they do exist, they are not things, they are processes. Except that will not do once they're in the secondary vocabulary. The intellect would not be dealing with it. It would not be secondarily efficient. It would not even be viable enough, alive enough, if it was still thought of as being a process. It has to become a thing. It has to become thing specific. It has to become thingamatized. And once you get an idea of that, then you see why it is safe, and then it's useful, and then it's no longer any consequence. It's not debatable that there is no such thing as any particular institution. There is no such thing as society. It is a primary process taken collectively and moved via words into the secondary world. It is then neo-primary, it is neo-necessary, but it's still, in one sense, from one quite valid view that's not, of course, available in the sit-in, it's not even proper, but from one view, you can say that they do not really exist, which is to say they do not exist in the way in which they are defined. They do not exist in the way in which they are now implanted in the human nervous system, that the church, academia, the state, society is actually a thing. It is a thing, obviously. Life has had people name it because it influences. They even blame it or give it credit for everything going right or wrong. But not because it's a thing, because you can't find it. Well, we've been through that. It seems childish enough that yes, you can go find the church buildings, but you cannot find the church. You can go find the pope. You can go find the local priest, but you cannot find the church because it doesn't exist. You cannot go find society. You can say, well, we're all society. You're sure you can say that. But where are you saying then everything that's wrong, you blame me? Well, no. All right, you blame me and him. Well, no. All right, you blame me and him and then his sister. Well, no. All right, you blame me and him and his sister and his mother. No. No. It is a process that has been turned into thing specific. That is, it is the energies that life needed for, in certain ways, and made men do certain things. And since the intellect cannot handle this kind of, which would be non-episodic, you understand, because you'd be dealing with the infinitely adjacent. There would never be an end to any episode. It would not be a weekly sitcom or a drama. It would not be the beginning and end of the movie. Ordinary intellect would feel, if it was ever confronted with this, would be like, Jesus, is there no end to this? And of course the answer would be no. But of course, even that won't fit, because the person that said that was not actually in a position to see the infinitely adjacent, or they wouldn't say, is there no end to this? They would be at first asking, is there no beginning to this? See? But they didn't say that because they had already established the beginning by them suddenly standing up, like in the middle of a river, and hollering, who started this? In other words, it cannot be done. I'm just playing with reality, ordinary reality, verbally again. But it cannot be done. society, civilization, the intellectual world of man, up-to-date, civilized, intellectual man is nothing but processes, primary processes in a collective manner, turned into things specific. It is processes thingamatized. There was a Kairoot that was read several nights ago that said, more or less, that no man is an example of anything unless you understand that a man is an example of everything. That every man, in fact, is an example of everything, I believe is the way it really went. This, if you followed any of it, I'll try to drag us a little more expansively through it for a second. But if you can see any of that, it is in counter-distinction to the city ideas that all examples, all ideas, all directions are ipsedixit, exclusively correct by them being there. All ideas, all undertakings, all institutions. That if the church is big enough, let's say the Catholic Church, when I say that for a second, even if you're not Catholic, if you are a civilized, run-of-the-mill, up-to-date, sophisticated human, and you're not a Catholic, you still would not, generally speaking, have any real passionate negative feelings toward the Catholic Church. You would not be out passing public energies around bad-mouthing the Catholic Church and showing yourself to be some kind of parochial, narrow-minded bigot. Because the very existence of this institution being so large, having such an effect, and if you have any trouble with that, up before this last year here, the USSR looked at as being the prime enemy of us living here in the United States. And still was a feeling, well, I don't like the communist idea. You don't know where you got the idea, but in other words, you're negative toward it. But the idea is, well, anybody that big, a country that big, which is an institution, an idea that big, of Marxism, an institution, anything that big, what I know about it, I don't like it. Well, I don't really know anything about it, but my daddy didn't like it, so I don't like it. But there is still a kind of unexpressed feeling that anything that large has some claim to existence. Now, nobody analyzes this way, I know, but can you get a feel of where I'm pointing? Its very existence on a continuing large scale is its own ipsedixit. It claims for itself, whether it says so or not, it claims for itself that we have some kind of exclusive right to be here. Whether you like us, whether you agree with us, our ideas come from on high. They come from great thinkers in the past. They come from some enlightened insight of me, yours truly. But all of it is based upon there being some kind of this, whatever they're presenting, an idea, an institution, a direction, a thought, that this is exemplary of something exclusively correct. Does anybody think that we actually changed the subject of the Kairoot saying that a man is not an example of anything, unless you understand that every man is an example of everything? That is the counter-distinction, because in the ordinary world of the intellect, the secondary world of the intellect, you cannot have something that would be exemplary unless it's exemplary of something specific. And so to say, well, this guy, now, of course, at the ordinary level, it's true enough to say, well, let's say that you are anti-Catholic, and you find out a priest has been arrested for embezzling funds, and you go, ha! That is the very thing I've been talking about. Or you find out that the Russians are reliving the Stalinist era. Somebody reports you one. I knew it. The communists will never change. You take one example, you're supposed to, and you take it as being exemplary of something specific, as you're supposed to. But it is a process that has been made thing specific. When I read a little Marx and Engels, they forced me to back when I was in first year at college. But I saw a TV special on Stalin, and I saw the kind of, bad person he was. Damn man's a maniac. Now that's what believing that kind of, and plus they're unchristian, that's what he represents. That is true enough in the secondary world. But you have taken a process, because Marxism, capitalism, Catholicism, Judaism, humanism, any other, are processes. They originally, like everything else, were processes, but now they have been made thing specific, and to take the thing specific as being exemplary of something is to continue to float in, wallow in, fight in, dance in the secondary world. Because at the secondary world, this one thing is exemplary of something. But if you can see beyond that, no one thing is exemplary of something, unless you understand that everything is exemplary of everything. And to do that is an absolute counter-distinction to ordinary thought, because to do this, you have got to move into the area of the infinitely adjacent. How about a closing example? One that was well known some years back. It was known as the water diet. Does anybody remember that? The basis of the diet, the best I recall, was you were supposed to drink, I think, 17 glasses of water a day, something like that. It was a prime example. I didn't see much reaction, but it was a big deal. The guy wrote 4 or 5 books, had a big practice down in Miami off of that one thing, the water diet. It was big news. Maybe it was more years ago than I thought, but it was big news. Trust me. The water diet. It's even the water diet dynamic, because, of course, I'm going to try to drag us beyond just the apparent purpose of the good doctor's water diet. It is a beautiful example of the secondary worlds, and now I was trying to drag you somewhere outside religion, of the secondary worlds' apparent serious, though futile, directions. Of the secondary world in areas that apparently are quite thing specific. That is, people want to lose weight. Serious matter, want to lose weight. And then offering directions, turning processes into things, and the directions are always serious. In case you lost track, this is still on the basis, as always, of men having lost their way. And to get back, to find the way, is serious business. In case any of you are looking blank at me out there, don't see the connection. To be overweight in the secondary world is the same thing as being a sinner in South Carolina. To have lost your way, or to have uncontrollable urges, to dress up like a Girl Scout and to do something weird in your room, is the same thing. And to feel guilty about it, of course, which we'll assume you should, do, is the same thing as being overweight and not liking it. Same thing as a minister, your mother, the voice of your conscience saying, "Oh, you bad boy." You go, "Oh, I know it." All of that's losing your way. All that's being alive. And the directions are there all the way from the churches historically. I just wanted you to see for a second. The water diet is not that dissimilar to Lutheranism. Just for instance. And don't ask me why I picked that one out, because that's none of your business. Unless you're a Lutheran, and then, of course, we know. But the water diet, back to it. The beautiful example of it was it gave interested people something to do which wouldn't actually hurt them, but was just inconvenient enough to give off the kind of sheen to your effort that there was some accomplishment. Which there was. Don't have to go into details. Let's assume you're out living a secondary life, out there working on a job. To drink 17 glasses of water a day, which I believe it was something like 17, 12-ounce glasses of water, is going to present at least an inconvenience. But notice, if you're just in general health, drinking 17 glasses of water is not going to hurt you. Is it going to do any good? But notice, at the end of the day, throughout the day, you then have the feeling, well, I'm accomplishing something. You have to keep getting up and go to the bathroom. You have to keep going over to the water fountain. You have to force yourself. You think, I'll die if I... But then you look down at the book, and the good doctor has instilled in you, which his name was Dr. Instillman. For those of you who are waiting for that joke, his name was Dr. Stillman. The Stillman water died. But he instilled in the people interested that they looked at the book. Well, no, he says you've got to have 17 glasses of water. And so you keep a little book and you mark off. Here it is, 2:30 in the afternoon, and I'm only up to 8 glasses. Oh, well, I got it. So it is the feeling of accomplishment. It is the feeling, all right, going into a church, lighting candles, falling on your knees, praying, facing Mecca, facing Minneapolis. You do something that is at least inconvenient enough that you apparently are accomplishing something just by remembering to do it, just by getting down and getting on your knees and facing in the right direction, checking your compass, just by drinking 17 glasses of water, lighting the candles, praying to Minneapolis. None of that's going to hurt you. But it's just inconvenient enough that if somebody says, how are you coming along with trying to find your spiritual way? I'm doing very well. It's a big convenience. I have to go, the path I'm following, we have to face directly toward Minneapolis, and we have to pray 7 times a day, and I've got to hide at work. I have to go in the bathroom, and I have to prop something against the door, and I have to do it. And so it seems like I'm getting somewhere. How you doing with your diet? Jesus, I don't know, sometimes I think we'll die. If I see more water, I'm going to go, ugh. But at least, by God, I'm sticking to it, sticking right to it. None of that sounds familiar. None of that sounds like the combination I ask you to consider, not of along with the dog in the word food, but man in the word I, of you jumping around, leaping up, and wagging your tail. And the thing, well, I've got to do something. I've got to find the right path, and it's either Dr. Stillman, your rabbi, a priest, your parents. My voice of conscience is hollering food. I'm sorry. Hollering I. No, I'm sorry. Hollering water. No. Pray. Oh, give. Processes turned into things specific. After all that, no one should make any mistake, by the way. I suddenly felt an urge to do a TV preacher. Make no mistake about it. I'll have to practice. Make no mistake about this. Fool's errands, fool's plans do, in the secondary world, pass for achievement. To laugh about, which wasn't, as you know, not the purpose of me bringing up the water diet and man and the word I, but what amounts to, in other words, futile efforts, the water diet dynamics. They do pass. They're supposed to. It's not because everybody in the city is from Dumas, Texas. In the city, fool's errands, the plans regarding fool's errands and busy work do pass. Or, if you want it that way, accomplishments in the secondary world. Anybody has any doubt for this? You do not have to go down in Texas and hang around Dumas, Texas, and as some people used to want to, is mispronounce their name, their fine Berg. You don't have to do that. All you got to do is check your own atlas, your own road map. Fool's errands, thinking on fool's errands, planning about it, 30 or 40 or 50 years. It didn't give you some feeling of accomplishment. Now you might right quick say, well, no, it didn't. That's why I'm trying to fool around with this. Yeah, but back at that ordinary level, it passed for accomplishment. If it did not, you would not be sitting here. You'd be in a home. You would have fallen outside the middle of the bell curve of ordinary humanity. You would no longer pass for sane. Now, at the last minute, after all of this, perhaps Papa Haydn might be agreeable in his spirit for me to add my own coda, my own wrap-up, our wrap-up. Could any of you consider the possibility? Could any of you see that each man's induced sensation of a separate individual I is the ultimate water diet?